Insane ban list. Absolutely crazy. Let's talk about its implications. I'll call it a tier list, but it's not meant to be a tier list. This morning, I thought to myself, how do I voice my thoughts on all the individual decks like one after another? And I think this is simply the best way because we have a nice visual where we can talk about all the decks, compare them to each other and all that kind of good stuff. So take it with a grain of salt because of course I haven't played with any of these decks after the new ban list. Let's start with the top 5 because I think that's the most important and also what shapes the future of the game a little bit. Even though a lot of other decks were viable before the ban list, these were the 5 that kind of shaped the format, right? Those were the first 5 decks you would think about before entering a tournament. They were the 5 decks that you played against the most usually. Tearlaments, I believe, out of these 5 takes the hardest hit because let's face it, the deck was mostly about getting to yugioh and Kelbeck, right? There were very few things that the deck did that were scary if they didn't ever get to Kelbeck or yugioh. And this is also why on my ban list prediction, I specifically said they should hit yugioh and Kelbeck because everything else the deck does is completely fine. I'm gonna throw it in mid. I personally don't see the greatest hopes for Tearlaments, but maybe people are gonna find something. You know, you still have Beatrice, you have the freaking Pilgrim Reaper, which is a rank 6 that mills 5. Maybe you can make a rank 6 Tearlament deck with Bestials. Maybe you can make a rank 8 Tearlament deck with Horus to make Zombie Vampire. I don't know, man. I don't think it's gonna be that strong, but we've made this mistake a couple times of calling Tearlaments dead and then they still came back. They rose back from the ashes and they were strong. Same thing happened at the beginning of this format. I think the most likely timeline for Tearlaments is they're probably going to do nothing this format and then maybe Konami will consider putting back some of the names to 2 because without yugioh and Kelbeck they might be like, yeah, we can give them back something, right? Purrely, I think out of these top 5 gets away relatively easily. Double Sleepy is a hit, but it's not a large hit. I think the deck is completely fine, honestly. The fact that you can still reveal Double Sleepy 1 Delicious for your My Friend is very, very reasonable still. I think the deck is very much to be respected. I'm gonna throw it up here. The only thing that's like slightly a caveat to this is if, and it's a large if, people expect Purrely to be up there. And that was one of the good things about Purrely in the current format. Because the format had so many different decks, it was kind of hard for people to play the silver bullets for Purrely, like the D-Barriers, the Kaijus, the Kurikaras, the Xyz Encores and stuff like that. You know, it was kind of hard to justify putting those cards into your deck when like there's so many different decks in the format. So Purrely, it's gonna depend if people are gonna respect it or not, but I think Purrely has the potential to be a very strong deck and should probably be respected in deck building. Which maybe in a couple weeks, we're going to be like, yeah, Purrely is just solid because everyone is playing outs to it in the side deck. Maybe. Let's put it at the very top of potential. You know, let's put it here. Okay. Unchained takes a large hit from this ban list. 1 Sharvara hits the deck in multiple ways. It hits consistency because pretty much every single 2-card combo you could start with Sharvara. It matters in the grind game because you may run out of Sharvaras and getting it back from the graveyard is possible, but not always optimal. You know, sometimes you would just like to grab a second one from the deck and that would be nice, but you cannot do that anymore. It has other major implications for your end boards because 1, most popular combos would use 2 Sharvaras. You wanted to end on Caesar that had a Sharvara and a Shayama attached to it, and you wanted to still end on a Sharvara in hand to dodge cards like Change of Heart, Talents, Marionette Might, those kind of things. That, quite simply, is not possible anymore. You can play 2 Shayama, but that is a huge downgrade. The deck played triple Sharvara, 1 Shayama for very good reason. I don't think this kills Unchained. Let me be clear. I'm gonna throw it probably at the bottom of solid. It depends, because I mean, a lot of the other decks also took a hit, but Labrynth is going to be a strong deck, and I think Unchained is still going to have a relatively strong matchup against Labrynth, which is maybe the only thing that keeps it from being a mid deck. When I say the deck is solid, that just means it's like playable at like maybe tier 2 to tier 3 level, but I'm still gonna put a lot of decks above Unchained. So if you look at it relative to other decks, I still think there's gonna be not that many reasons to play Unchained because there's gonna be other decks that are better. Just so we're on the same wavelength. I think the deck itself, it's still gonna work. I just think there's gonna be better stuff. Rescue Ace, on the other hand, I still think is gonna be fine. 1 Airlifter is a decent hit to the deck for sure, but I think the deck can make up for it in major ways. Let's call this one potential / strong and this one very strong. That's better. I like that more. The thing is, I'm kind of thinking a month ahead, maybe. Once Phantom Nightmare and the new Maze set comes out, Rescue Ace is gonna be strong, but I don't know if you want to play Rescue Ace over Fire King. Yes, we get large support for fire decks in general. You could play Rescue Ace with that, but I personally just think Fire King is gonna be better. On top of that, Rescue Ace suffers from the fact that Labrynth remains completely unhit, which out of the top decks is probably the worst matchup for Rescue Ace. I'm not going to put Rescue Ace in the highest tier on this banlist. I simply won't. It's still good, but I don't think it's that good anymore. Labrynth, can't help but put it into the very strong category. The deck was already really good. It has a good Rescue Ace matchup. The deck is going to get huge support in January. It didn't get hit at all on this ban list. I think Lab is going to be very strong. Also, the fact that the Furniture Lab is going to be strong, it's not as simple as just putting Lightning Storm, Feather Duster, or Cosmic Cyclone into your decks, because funnily enough, those cards are not even that good against it, because the deck plays way more like a combo deck. But there are other means to counter Labrynth. Like, you can use Ash, you can use Bell, those kind of things, right? There are cards that are good against Labrynth. I still think that Labrynth is the biggest winner of this ban list, probably. So I'm going to put it in very strong. Only because counterplay exists, I don't think that's a reason to completely discount the deck, right? And that's my opinion on how the top 5 are going to look after. The more interesting part is, what about the decks that didn't get hit? Or what about the stuff that got unbanned? What about that? Flu didn't change at all. You still have a shifter deck. It still depends on how many hand traps people use. If it's a board breaker format again and people don't play hand traps, then maybe it's going to be solid. If people still play a lot of hand traps, then it's going to be mid. Fire Kings. We have to differentiate between current Fire King, which I would probably put somewhere here, and we have to also look at post Phantom Nightmare Fire King, which I want to preface, this deck's going to be here. Before Phantom Nightmare, this deck is already right here. I'm going to do it for current format. We're going to talk about Phantom Nightmare Fire King more than enough in the upcoming weeks. For now, 4 people topped YCS Bologna with Fire Kings, proving that the deck is already good, didn't get hit on the ban list at all whatsoever. Great deck moving forward, I think, and gets completely insane after Phantom Nightmare. So have your eyes on Fire Kings. Branded, it's just a solid deck. I'm not going to call Branded mid, even though I don't love it, but it didn't get any hits, so it remains a solid deck. There's no way it's not playable. Centurion has potential. It was a deck that also performed relatively well at YCS Bologna. I think one huge advantage of Centurion is the large amount of non-engine you can play. Calamities did not get hit on the ban list, unfortunately, so it still has that going for it. Think of the Calamity Lock what you want. I don't like it personally, but like, 1 card Calamity Lock with 20 non-engine is just scary, dude. It's scary. It's gonna depend on the rest of the format. If the format is super diverse, then it's gonna be a little tougher to build a good Centurion deck, because how do you address 10 different decks with your non-engine? It's not going to be as simple. But if the format is like just Lab and Mannadium or something like that, you can probably make a really good hand trap Centurion list into those kind of decks, you know? So I think it's got potential. Dragon Link is also fine. It depends, you know. The reason why I'm not sure if Dragon Link is in the best spot right now is because it's going to struggle into some of the fire decks. Dragon Link is really good into like the decks where Bestials are really good. However, Tear and Unchained got a large slap on the wrist, which were some of its better matchups. Lab is still a fine matchup for it, but you're gonna have weird matchups into Rescue Ace, Fire King, Purrely. Those kind of matchups, they're winnable for Dragon Link, but I wouldn't call them super strong matchups for it, but it's still a solid deck. Exosister, I feel like I'm being generous when I throw it in mid. Let's not talk too much about Exosister. I don't think it's going to be that great. Hash Tira gets a 3rd unicorn and gets to keep the 3 shifters. That is not going to be enough to make it a powerful deck in the metagame. However, I will say there are environments where Cash Tira can work, and it has proven that in the current format because it has been topping regional events, even YCSs here and there. Because turns out that freaking unicorn, Fenrir, hand trap, shifter kind of control is good enough in certain formats where decks are weak to hand traps and weak to shifter especially, and you just have a lot of efficient 1 cards. Birth is an insane card, Fenrir is an insane card, Unicorn's an insane card. Even though you don't have that Arise Heart kind of auto win anymore, I think it's possible to be played. I don't know if I want to throw it at the bottom of solid or the top of mid, somewhere here. The distinction between the two doesn't really make a huge impact, I think. it's one of those decks where it's going to depend on how good your non-engine matches up into the meta game, right? I think my least favorite part about this ban list, the fact that they left Mannadium completely untouched. You can't really fault them for it because Mannadium didn't really do all that much. It's still scary. I feel like it's the deck that everyone is gonna default to that likes to play combo decks, right? It's scary. I'll put it here simply because I don't have enough experience with the deck. I think Mannadium is very respectable, and it's probably going to be the reason why people are going to have to keep playing hand traps. The time to play Mannadium is probably now. Mikanko, the Gen and Ken going first kind of version, I feel like is taking a large hit from this. I wouldn't play that specific deck anymore. However, I think Mikanko as an engine still has a lot of potential. The only reason I'm not putting it higher is because I don't know how I would use it yet. Infernoble, I've heard that people are still playing around and there's still combo lines without Isold. I personally don't see it, but I also am not the kind of person that's been labbing the deck inside and out. I personally think it's not very good anymore. I'll throw it at the very bottom of mid, I suppose. Plants, I'm gonna cope and say I hope it's mid now. I don't know enough to say it's for sure dead. Deep down in my heart, I hope the plants have died with this. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. I will certainly not try to make it work. I hope no one does. If you try to make plants work, I hope you don't succeed. Let's talk about Runicks. And when I say Runicks, I mean everything that isn't Runick stun. I'll talk about my YCS Bologna deck and then Runick in general. You might think that I would just say, yeah, this deck is very strong because it didn't get hit on the ban list at all and everything got hit. The thing you have to realize is that Runick decks are always very dependent on the environment. Because Runick decks only have very little room for non-engine, the deck has to carry its own weight without drawing many non-engine cards. You can't rely on hand trapping combo decks. You can't rely on drawing a board breaker. That being said, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't think this deck was in a very good spot moving forward. Specifically, it has a very good Labrynth matchup, and some of the harder matchups got weaker, like Rescue Ace. However, some of its really good matchups also got weaker. The decks where Bystials were really good, you know, Unchained, Tier, they're all down here. Rescue Ace, Fire King, Purrely, those kind of decks. Going second, they're really scary if you're playing a Bystial Runick deck. I don't know if this would be my favorite Runick version going forward, especially if Mannadium becomes very popular. It's so scary to play against Mannadium. So even though the deck is unhit, I don't know how much I want to play it. It depends on the environment, but it definitely has potential. And I think that is also true for Runick decks in general. We're going to have to work out which one is the best. Every Runick version is going to be strong against Labrynth. Every Runick version is going to struggle against Mannadium, though, for example. I will try it, trust me. And if it works out, then I'll be a happy man. Chimera is just another, I think, solid deck. Like, if I'm looking at these decks up here and I'm looking at Dragon Link, Chimera, Branded, these kind of things, like, I think there's a difference between the power level of these decks and these decks. They're still playable, definitely. If you like the Chimera deck and you want to play it, you can. The decks that are in solid, I think you're gonna need a good reason to play them over these decks up here. For example, the only reason to play Branded over some of these decks up here is because maybe you don't have a different deck or you just really like the deck. If you play those decks, you can still do well with it. You know, you can definitely win regionals, maybe even top YCSs. That's the kind of level I attest to these decks in solid. The ones in mid are the ones where I think you're gonna have a hard time performing at those kind of events, right? That's the difference between those. By that definition, I think Salamangreat goes like here. You can play Salad if you really want to. You can perform with Salad if you have a good day, if you play it well, you build it well, and you have some luck on your side. I don't think there's a good reason to play Salad moving forward. I think there's going to be better decks. Also, it loses Gozen and Rivalry to 1, which is like the only deck out of the first 3 rows that actually used those cards with Salad. Sword Soul, like the definition of a mid deck these days. Third Desires is nice, but that's about it. Spright decks. People might expect me to put this up here, probably. And this only goes for pure Spright. We've already talked about Runick versions. Runick versions, I think, have potential. As far as just Spright goes, the third starter, I don't think makes a huge difference. And I think the deck is going to be playable / solid, but I don't really attest it the potential to be much more than that. I simply don't think without Elf, the deck is ever going to be oppressive anymore. It was already solid. It was already a playable deck, but it was not strong. And I think it's going to stay that way. I think the third starter just doesn't change that much about it. Vanquish Soul. Honestly, I don't think main decking Tikaboo was even optimal. I think Vanquish Soul is somewhere between solid and potential. I think I'm gonna throw it in potential. It's the best shifter deck, I think. It gets to play Bell, which is really good against Lab. I just think the deck is strong overall. You still have your triple Prosperity, you still have your triple Fenrir, you still have your triple Shifter, you still have a lot of room for non-engine. I think it's looking good for Vanquish Soul. I think Vanquish Soul enjoyers are eating good right now. You can still play the deck almost exactly as you did before. Honestly, Tikaboo was more like a side deck card anyways. You can play Kurikara if Purrely becomes more popular. I like it. Now we talk about the stuff that came off of the list as far as like individual cards go. These do not necessarily stand for a specific deck, rather just my thoughts on these cards as a whole. Orcust Harp Horror, I don't think is going to spawn any good decks. I think unfortunately Orcust is mid. I hope it's better than this, but my instinct, and once again take it with a grain of salt because this is my first impression, is that Orcust is not going to make a huge splash. The same is true for Terratop. I mean, pure Speedroid enjoyers are eating good, I suppose. If you're playing Speedroid Kashtira, I suppose you're eating good. I don't know if that deck's more than mid though. The 3 people in the universe that play that deck probably know better than I do. So, I mean, let me know if it's a good deck now or not. Ib, the World Chalice Justicar. Where do I put you? I don't know. The card is strong, for sure. I simply don't know where it goes because I was scared when Denglong came off the list and no one used the Denglong really. Ib is a better card than Denglong, but not by that much. I looked at some Dragon Link lists with Ib and those looked playable. So I'm gonna put this one in solid. I think out of the unbans, this one has the highest potential to spawn some new decks. I think you can mess around with it and maybe someone finds something that's even better than solid. And this is what I think of most of the stuff in the current format right now. Well, of course, it's not possible to talk about every single deck, but if you have any decks that you want my opinion on after the new ban list, make sure to leave a comment down below. I'll try to answer all of them as much as possible. Also, let me know what you think of this new format. I think it's looking to be pretty nice, honestly. And thank you for watching, everybody. Appreciate that.